I, 26, male, received a call from a blocked number and heard my grandmother's voice on the other end. She was sobbing hysterically. She told me she was in jail after a terrible accident and needed me to wire $10,000 to a lawyer immediately. I almost sent my entire savings. The voice was a perfect artificial intelligence clone, and it was my aunt, WHO, was behind it. I am a 26-year-old man, and I work a boring but stable job in logistics. For the past 4 years, I have been diligently saving every spare dollar for a down payment on a small condo. It is my one big goal. My savings account, which had just crossed the $10,000 mark, was my pride and joy. It represented 4 years of skipped vacations, packed lunches, and saying no to nights out with friends. It was my future. My grandmother is the single most important person in my life. She is 82 years old, sharp as a tack, and still lives independently in the small house where she raised my mother. We talk on the phone every single day, without fail. I know the sound of her voice better than my own. I know the way she sighs before telling a long story, the little chuckles she does when she is about to say something mischievous, the specific cadence of her "oh dear." She is my rock. The call came on a Wednesday evening. I had just gotten home from work and was making myself a sandwich. My phone buzzed, displaying a blocked number. Normally I would ignore it, but for some reason, I answered. The first sound I heard was a gut-wrenching sob, and then a voice, her voice, choked with tears, said my name. My heart dropped into my stomach. It was my grandmother. She sounded terrified. She told me she had been in a car accident. She said she had run a red light and hit another car. She told me the other driver was hurt, and that she had been arrested. She was crying so hard I could barely understand the words. Then, a man's voice came on the line. He identified himself as a public defender. His voice was calm but firm, the kind of voice designed to convey authority in a crisis. He explained that my grandmother was distraught, and that he needed me to listen very carefully. He said she was being held at the Central Precinct and that bail had been set at $10,000. He told me that due to the nature of the accident, the payment had to be made immediately via a wire transfer to a specific account to ensure she could be released tonight. He told me not to tell anyone, especially not my parents, because my grandmother was so ashamed and did not want to worry them. The request made a twisted kind of sense. My grandmother is an intensely proud woman, and the thought of her calling me, her favorite grandchild, for help in a moment of shame felt plausible. The lawyer gave me the wiring instructions, an account number, and a name. He stressed the urgency. He said if we did not act fast, she would have to spend the night in a holding cell. I was in a complete panic. My hands were shaking. My only thought was of my grandmother, alone and scared in a jail cell. I told him I had the money. I told him I would send it right now. I ran to my laptop, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was already typing in my bank's website address when a tiny, cold splinter of doubt lodged itself in my brain. It was one small detail. During her panicked, sobbing explanation, she had called me sweetheart. My grandmother has never called me sweetheart in her life. She has a very specific, slightly embarrassing pet name for me that she has used since I was a child. She always uses it, especially when she is emotional. Why would she not use it now? Update 1. That one tiny inconsistency, the word sweetheart, was enough to make me pause. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. My mind was racing, trying to reconcile the perfect replica of her voice with this one glaring error. Everything else had been flawless. The panicked tone, the specific way she pronounced my name, the sound of her catching her breath between sobs. It was her. And yet, it was not. The lawyer's voice came back on the phone, sharp and impatient. He asked if I was there. He asked if I was sending the money. The pressure was immense. But then I remembered something else. Years ago, my grandmother and I had watched a news report about grandparents being scammed out of their savings. Afterward, she had made a joke. She said if she ever truly needed me in an emergency, she would ask me a specific, silly question to prove it was her. Our secret code was the question, did the squirrels win the lottery yet? It was a reference to a ridiculous story she had once told me. The woman on the phone had not asked the question. I felt a wave of nausea. I told the lawyer that my internet was being slow and I needed to restart my router. I told him I would call him right back on this number. He immediately said no, that they could not accept incoming calls and that I needed to stay on the line. He said the transfer had to be completed now. His insistence on keeping me on the line, on preventing me from thinking, was the final red flag. I made a split-second decision. I put the phone on my desk, speakerphone on, and told him I was working on it. Then I grabbed my work cell phone from my bag. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely unlock it. I went to my contacts and found the one labeled Grandma Home. I pressed call, my ear glued to the receiver, while the scammer's voice continued to drone on from my other phone, urging me to hurry up. The phone rang once, twice, and then she answered. Her voice was calm, cheerful, and completely normal. She asked me how my day was. She told me she had just finished weeding her prize-winning roses and was about to watch her favorite game show. The relief that washed over me was so powerful it almost buckled my knees. She was safe. She was at home. She had no idea that a perfect, soulless copy of her own voice was at that very moment trying to steal my entire future. The relief was immediately followed by a feeling of cold, terrifying rage. This was not just a random scammer. The voice was too perfect. The story was too tailored. They knew she had a grandson. They knew she was elderly and lived alone. And a new, darker suspicion began to form in my mind. A suspicion that made my blood run cold. Update 2. I ended the call with my real grandmother, telling her I loved her and that I would talk to her tomorrow, my voice shaking with the effort of sounding normal. I took a deep, centering breath and turned my full attention back to the phone on my desk. The lawyer was still talking, his voice now laced with frustration. He was telling me that I was jeopardizing my grandmother's well-being. My panic was completely gone now, replaced by an icy, focused calm. I was not going to hang up. I was not going to scream at them. I was going to play their game. I needed to get as much information as I possibly could. I needed to nail these people to the wall. I picked up the phone and put on the performance of my life. I let my voice tremble. I apologized profusely. I told him my bank's website had crashed and that I was on the phone with their tech support. I told him they were walking me through a manual transfer, but I needed the details again to be sure. I made him spell out the full name on the account. I made him repeat the account and routing numbers 3 separate times, pretending I was having trouble hearing him. Each time, I typed the information into a notepad file on my computer. Then I told him the bank needed a physical address for the recipient. He seemed hesitant at first, but my feigned incompetence and panic must have been convincing. He sighed heavily and gave me an address, telling me it was the law firm's administrative office. I typed it down. I kept stalling. I invented a series of increasingly ridiculous technical problems. I told him my security token was not working. I told him my bank had put a fraud alert on my account and I needed to verify my identity. For every problem I invented, he had an answer, his voice growing more and more aggressive. He was a professional, he was good at this. But I was better. While he was trying to bully me, I was doing something else. I had opened up a second window on my computer, and I was recording the entire call using a desktop app. Every word he said, every fake sob from the fake grandmother, was now being saved as a digital file. I kept him on the line for 15 minutes, then 20, then 30. I could feel his frustration mounting. He started to threaten me, telling me they would have no choice but to leave my grandmother in jail overnight and it would be my fault. I pretended to start crying, telling him I was doing my best. I was a puppet master, and he was dancing on my strings. Update 3. While I was juggling the live phone call with the scammer, I was simultaneously executing the next phase of my plan. On my laptop, I opened a new browser window and went to my local police department's website. They had a non-emergency web chat feature for reporting fraud. I initiated a chat, and within seconds, an officer was responding. Keeping one ear on the scammer's angry monologue, I typed with the speed and focus of a man possessed. I explained the situation in clear, concise terms. I wrote that I was on a live call with a scammer using an artificial intelligence voice clone of my grandmother. I provided the police with the phone number they were spoofing, the bank account details, the name, and the address the lawyer had given me. I told them I was currently recording the call. The officer in the chat, a Detective Miller, responded immediately. His tone was serious. He told me that this type of highly sophisticated voice cloning scam was becoming more common and was incredibly difficult to trace. He asked me to keep the scammer on the line for as long as I possibly could. He said they would start a trace on the financial information immediately. Then, he asked me a question that made the hair on my arms stand up. He asked if I had any idea who might be behind this. He asked if there was anyone in my life who knew about my savings, who knew my grandmother well, and who might be desperate for money. And my mind went to one person, and one person only, my Aunt Carol, my mother's younger sister. Carol had always been the black sheep of the family, lurching from one financial disaster to another. She had recently been asking everyone for money for a new business idea, but after getting burned so many times, the entire family had cut her off. She knew about my condo savings. I had foolishly mentioned it at our last family dinner. And then, the final, horrifying piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Just last week, Carol had visited my grandmother. My grandma had been so excited to show her the new digital photo frame I had bought her. It was a fancy one that allowed family members to send photos and record short voice messages for her remotely. My grandma had told me Carol spent over an hour playing with it, listening to all the messages I had left. She would have had a treasure trove of high-quality audio samples of my grandmother's voice. A perfect, pristine dataset to train an artificial intelligence model. I typed all of this to Detective Miller. I told him about my aunt, her money problems, and the digital photo frame. There was a pause in the chat, and then Detective Miller replied. He told me this was no longer just a random fraud case. He said this was a very strong, very specific lead. He asked me to stay on the phone call, to do whatever it took to keep them talking. He said a team was now actively working the case, and they believed the bank account was the key. My heart was pounding. I was no longer just a victim. I was live bait in a police trap, and the prey was my own aunt. The phone call with the scammer was now approaching the 1-hour mark, and I was running out of excuses. I did not know how much longer I could keep the charade going. Update 4. I was running out of lies. The scammer on the phone, the man pretending to be a lawyer, was starting to get genuinely suspicious. His tone had shifted from aggressive urgency to a cold, pointed questioning. He told me this was the longest it had ever taken anyone to complete a simple wire transfer. He asked me what my bank's name was again. He asked me for the name of the tech support agent I was supposedly talking to. My mind was scrambling for answers, my carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. Just as I was about to break, a new message popped up in the web chat from Detective Miller. It was simple and electric. It read, "Account flagged. Bank is cooperating. We have a name and social security number. Keep him on the line. We are tracing the IP address of the last login." A fresh surge of adrenaline coursed through me. This was working. I had to hold on. I took a breath and unleashed my final, most desperate gambit. I told the scammer that the bank had finally approved the transfer. I let out a huge, fake sigh of relief. I told him the money was on its way. I said the bank agent had told me it might take a few minutes for the funds to appear on his end, and that I needed to stay on the line to receive a confirmation number. It was a perfect lie because it mirrored the very tactic he had been using on me, creating a reason to keep the phone line open. The scammer's tone changed again, instantly shifting back to one of smooth professionalism now that he believed he had won. He told me I had done the right thing, that my grandmother would be so proud of me. The words made my stomach turn. He started making small talk, asking me about my job, trying to sound like a friendly, helpful official. All the while, I was watching the police chat window, my real focus entirely on Detective Miller's updates. A new message appeared. IP trace complete. The bank account was accessed 30 minutes ago from a public Wi-Fi network at a coffee shop. The address is 1412 Oak Street. I felt a jolt. I knew that coffee shop. It was 3 blocks away from my Aunt Carol's apartment. The evidence was becoming a tightening knot. My feigned conversation with the scammer was becoming more and more surreal. He was telling me about the weather while a police detective was feeding me live updates on the manhunt for his accomplice. Another message from Miller. "We have a squad car in the area. Plainclothes officers are on their way to the coffee shop." I could barely breathe. I asked the scammer a stupid question about the legal process, just to fill the silence, my voice sounding distant and strange to my own ears. I watched the 3 little dots in the chat window, knowing Detective Miller was typing. The next message was the one that changed everything. "Suspect is on the move. Bank account was just accessed again. New IP pinging from a residential address. 1520 Oak Street. Apartment 4B. Can you confirm this address?" My blood turned to ice. 1520 Oak Street. Apartment 4B. It was my Aunt Carol's address. They had not even bothered to cover their tracks properly. The greed had made them sloppy. I typed back, "Confirmed. That is my aunt's apartment." Detective Miller's final message came a second later. "We have everything we need. You can end the call now. Do not contact your aunt. We will be in touch shortly. You did good work." I looked at my phone, still on speaker. The scammer was in the middle of a sentence. I interrupted him. My voice was no longer trembling. It was flat and cold. I said, "The squirrels never won the lottery." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. Then, after a long pause, the man's voice, now stripped of all its fake authority, just said, "What did you say?" I repeated the words. "My grandmother's code. The squirrels. You lose." I hung up the phone. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I sat there, shaking, for a long, long time. Update 5. The hour after I hung up the phone was the most agonizing of my life. I paced my small apartment like a caged animal, replaying the conversation, replaying the look I imagined on my aunt's face. Every buzz of my phone made me jump. Finally, it rang. It was Detective Miller. His voice was calm and professional. He told me that a team had been dispatched to my aunt's address. He said that when they knocked, she had refused to open the door. After several minutes, they had heard the sound of a computer hard drive being smashed. They had to force entry. They found her in the small home office, a hammer in her hand, and the remnants of her laptop on the floor. Detective Miller told me they had found a burner phone, the number matching the one my phone had registered the call from. They found notes with my name, my grandmother's name, and details about the car accident story. And they found a bank statement for the account I had reported. It was all there. She was caught, red-handed. He told me she had been arrested and was being transported to the Central Precinct for processing on charges of felony fraud and extortion. Then he asked me something I was not prepared for. He asked if I would be willing to come to the station to give a formal, in-person statement. He said it would strengthen the case significantly. A part of me wanted to say no, to curl up in a ball and pretend none of this had ever happened, but I knew I had to see it through. I had started this, and I had to finish it. The police station was exactly as grim as you see in the movies. I was led to a small, sterile interview room where I recounted the entire story to Detective Miller, my voice hoarse. When I was done, he told me my aunt had already confessed to everything. Her partner on the phone was a man she had met in an online gambling forum, who had provided the artificial intelligence voice cloning software and the fake lawyer persona. My aunt had provided the target, her own family. She had admitted to recording my grandmother's voice from the digital picture frame. She was deeply in debt from a gambling addiction, owing dangerous people a lot of money. This was her one big, desperate play to get out of it. As I was leaving the station, I saw them moving her from one room to another down a long hallway. She was in handcuffs. Our eyes met for a split second. The look on her face was not one of remorse or anger, it was a look of hollow, pathetic shame. She looked away first. That image, the image of my mother's sister in handcuffs, will be burned into my memory forever. I drove home in a daze, the city lights blurring through my tears. My first call was not to my parents, it was to my grandmother. I just needed to hear her real voice. She answered, cheerful as always, and I just broke down, sobbing into the phone, unable to form words. She did not understand what was happening, but she did what she always does. She soothed me, her calm, familiar voice, a balm on my shattered nerves. Update 6. Telling my mother was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. I drove to my parents' house the next day. I sat them down in their familiar living room, the same room where we had celebrated countless birthdays and holidays with my Aunt Carol, and I told them everything. The initial reaction was disbelief, which quickly turned to horror. My mother's face crumpled. The thought that her own sister could orchestrate something so cruel, using their mother's voice as a weapon, was too much to bear. She cried for hours, but then something shifted. Through her grief, a new emotion began to surface, anger, and it was directed at me. She asked me how I could have gone to the police. She said this was a family matter, something we should have handled internally. She said Carol was sick, that she had a problem, and that I had thrown her to the wolves instead of trying to help her. My father, who had been silent, finally spoke. He told my mother she was wrong. He looked at me, his eyes full of a pained sadness, and said I had done the only thing I could do. He said what Carol had done was not just a mistake, it was a monstrous betrayal, and it was a crime. That conversation created a fault line in my family. The news spread, and relatives took sides. Some called me a hero for protecting my grandmother. Others called me a traitor for turning on my own blood, echoing my mother's words that I should have kept it in the family. My relationship with my mother is now strained to a breaking point. We speak, but there is a cold distance between us that was never there before. She looks at me and sees the person who sent her sister to jail. I look at her and see someone who would have asked me to sacrifice my future for an unrepentant criminal. The legal case concluded quickly. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, my Aunt Carol's lawyer advised her to plead guilty. She was convicted of felony wire fraud. Given her gambling addiction and lack of a prior criminal record, the judge sentenced her to 2 years of probation, mandatory addiction counseling, and full financial restitution. The restitution part is a joke, of course, as she has no money. Her accomplice was never identified. He was a ghost in the machine. I got my $10,000 back. The police were able to freeze the account before the funds were moved. My condo savings are safe, but the cost was immense. I have a whole section of my family that will never speak to me again. The incident forced me to see the deep fractures that had always existed just beneath the surface of our happy family photos. It taught me that desperation can turn people you love into monsters, and that modern technology has given those monsters terrifyingly powerful new tools. My grandmother and I are closer than ever. She knows all the details now, and she tells me every day how proud she is of me. We have a new secret code now. It is much more complicated.